So I am Karen Alexander, and I have been involved with the Immersive Learning Research Network for some years now, and I'm very proud to be a part of it and to take part in events such as this. And I'm excited today to welcome Dr. Matteo Zallio, who will be speaking to us. And Dr. Matteo Zallio, Master of Architecture, PhD, is on a mission to make emergent technologies accessible and inclusive for all. Matteo is an award-winning designer, researcher, and adjunct professor. He has a unique background in helping businesses to develop futuristic technologies that are inclusive and to consider different aspects of human diversity, such as ability, language, culture, gender, and age. He is currently the founder of the Metavethics Institute, which sounds amazing, a senior UX researcher at Autodesk, a senior BI fellow at the University of Cambridge Hughes Hall, an adjunct faculty member at Dublin City University. Matteo was previously a Fulbright Research Fellow at Stanford University, an A. Graves Research Fellow at Technological University Dublin, and he founded a startup and authored several books on design and technology. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Matteo Zallio.
Thank you so much, Karen. Welcome everybody to the session today. I'm so excited to have so many people passionate about XR, VR, AR, and more, and education as well to the session today. And thanks for the introduction, Karen. So, well spotted. Yeah, today we're talking about the ethics of XR. Metavethics, the ethics of metaverse experiences, XR, VR, and AR. So let me share my screen, and then we can get the ball rolling here. I believe you can all see my screen. I think it's going to work well for now, still in the 2D virtual world. Soon we're going to be in the 3D, hopefully. But yeah, today, I just wanted to inspire you a little bit on the research we have been doing in the past couple of years and sort of shine the light on basically a new research field or somehow a new effort on understanding more about the ethical implications of technologies associated with digital virtual worlds. So we know there has been a lot going on around keywords such as metaverse, around XR in general, and so virtual reality or augmented reality or mixed reality. What is interesting is that the melting pot of these technologies that can be called metaverse, can be called anything that is going to be maybe better defined in the future, brings some opportunities and challenges that align across the domains of ethics, integrity, and social implications. And so today I wanted to share with you a couple of slides about what we've done so far, but also what we see in the future. So there is, despite the news that we can read, if we dig deeper into the numbers and also into the research that has been done so far and is currently ongoing, we know that there is a shift towards digital and virtual environments because people are spending a lot of time learning, playing, working on tools that are basically a medium between our physical world and a virtual or digital world. No matter if it's a virtual, fully immersive, or partially immersive, or extended reality, or simply a screen a couple of centimeters in front of our eyes. But there is evidence that we are shifting into a world where socialization, entertainment, productivity is fostered through digital and virtual environments. And so we we found by reading to some research as well as some reports that apparently very soon, in a couple of years, a quarter of the population will spend at least an hour a day into a digital virtual environment. Now, if this is a purely virtual, if this is purely mixed reality environment, or if it's a digital, so some sort of AR technology, well, that tells us quite a lot, right? Now, of course, these numbers are changing dramatically every 6 months. However, a question that I'm curious to ask you is about how would you feel about spending an hour a day in a virtual reality environment or in an extended reality environment? Would you think your behavior is going to change? Would you think your perception of the world and the people around you is going to change, or maybe not? Well, there is already some evidence that by spending a lot of time on social media, and the social media for now is just on a screen of your smartphone, tablet, or computer, can impact your life, your behavior, your culture. And so we have tons of examples from current and previous technologies, how the internet changed our life, how smartphones change our life, how wearable devices change our life. And every 5 to 10 years, there has been some sort of big moment, like in 2010, 2009, it was the years of smartphones. 2014 and 15 were the years of smart watches, wearables. 2 years ago was the year of the Metaverse. This year is the year of AI. What else? Now, it's interesting to understand that this might not be the real future as we have envisioned a year ago. However, it's good that we have different visions for what the future could be, because essentially we are all here to better understand how ethical emerging technologies for XR will impact the life of every human being in the world. There are lots of challenges. And so we have to understand how we can empower companies, how can we empower institutions, how can we empower designers and everybody to design these technologies by people, with people, and for people. So, so far we've done a mix of, we've run a mix of qualitative and quantitative studies to depict what are the challenges, what are the opportunities around the topic of designing for digital and virtual environments, designing for XR. Again, XR is this umbrella term that brings together VR and AR and mixed reality. Now, one of the pieces that I would like to share with you today is a journal paper on qualitative research journal paper, where we try to map out what were the biggest challenges that people face when approaching or when getting closer to, broadly speaking, metaverse technologies, XR technologies. And one major aspect is about understanding what those technologies are and what those technologies can be used for. Then there are other concerns around safety and well-being, personalization, that also leads into the problem of how much we personalize and how much safety and privacy and data protection and therefore integrity can we guarantee into a space that is extremely personalized. How can we access those technologies? And then the domain of social equity and diversity. How do we answer the demand of underrepresented minorities that would like to access or would like to understand more about those technologies, but they can't? And so in one of these interviews with experts, we understood that it's not only relevant how big the door to access the metaverse or XR technologies is, so every user can easily walk in, but more the sense of belonging, more how do I feel part of that? And we could say, well, we learned that from social media, right? And so with this research, we really mapped out a lot of topics that actually sparked the creation of further research questions that we have been using to do more research, more quantitative studies, more experiments, more testing, and basically try to unfold all of these domains that are currently shaping the trends, the opportunities, and the challenges. And so, mindful of time, but also conscious that we are all curious about understanding more about how can we bring this research forward and how can we inform for, a better design of those XR technologies. I'll give you a couple of examples of those major areas that we have explored. And I'll give you some questions that we are currently investigating with other projects. So when we talk about people's safety and well-being, a question that comes to mind is, what kind of mechanisms or tools will enable the metaverse and digital virtual environments to be safe places where well-being is at their roots? And here we have a quote from one of our interviewers. So, for example, if I came very close to you in a virtual environment, how do you feel? Would you feel uncomfortable? Would you feel comfortable? What would you say? What would you do? What would this guy really want from me? So the proxemics into a virtual space are different than into a bar or a restaurant or a place in the physical world. And then, of course, there is a huge topic of personalization. So a question that we are exploring now is, to what extent users will be able to personalize content, features, and much more in a way that could be accessible and simultaneously will not cause harm or anxiety to other users. So here we have a quote which is about freedom with limitations. It is the digital world, but the interactions would be with real people. You can't just be as free as you want to be because it's a digital space. So this raises not just questions, but ways to test this topic in different ways, these hypotheses in different ways. And what's the answer? And then we've got the data privacy and integrity, where it's curious to understand how might we develop tools to secure data privacy and protection across different platforms and companies that are integrity driven. And so a quote from one of our interviewees shares that data creation policies create an ethical question on who really owns the avatar, the user or the platform. Again, today we're just scratching the surface. In the paper, there are much more detailed information. But when we talk about accessibility, how can we maximize the opportunities offered by those technologies and build them by being truly accessible from the ground up? So the internet wasn't accessible in the 70s, was an exclusive technology. But today has been purposely redesigned to be more accessible. So do we want to approach the development of those technologies like we did with the internet, or do we want to learn from the past to build a better future? So when we come to the topic of social equity and diversity, well, some people might say, well, it's just a virtual space. It's just an augmented reality space with some layers of information. So what's gonna happen? Well, there are opportunities to reduce barriers, to increase inclusion, and therefore to allow people who might not be able to visit a place to be able to experience with certain emotions what others might be experiencing if they visit a place. And so one of the experts just said, once I'm in that space, when I'm in the metaverse, do I feel that I belong there? And this interviewee thought that it's not just a problem about the metaverse, it's a problem about the inhabitants of the metaverse. So these lays the ground for building foundations and the instrument new research programs around this topic. And so this is our manifesto that was developed out of this research and other work that we have done before to really shine the light on what are the driving principles that we have to dig deeper while we are developing XR technologies. And if you look deeply and thoroughly read through the lines here, you will see that we are getting into a rabbit hole in each of the topics that you see here. So each of them is what is currently sparking the research that we're doing now. When we talk to policymakers, with standard and regulatory bodies, with different organizations, we can break down across these 10 principles a number of research questions that is limitless. And I'll give you a number here. So currently, we have 147 research questions in our Kanban board. That means potentially 147 research projects. So currently we have just a number of them running. But I can tell you there are more than 100 that still have to be started, at least by us. If you want to join, you know where we are. And this is just, we're just scratching the surface here. And now the big question is, how might we answer these questions and many more that I'm sure you have in your drawer, I'm sure you have on your computer, I'm sure you have in your mind? Well, the answer is that we don't have to answer to all of them. But something that we need to be mindful is that so far, there is not much out there in terms of answering the questions and providing with the right insights and evidences for policymakers, for organizations to abide to certain rules. So essentially, I'm not currently aware of policies that limit freedom of expression in a virtual reality environment, unless a company internally sets the boundaries for that. But no matter which environment we use, well, we can incur into the risk of not having our rights safeguarded, maybe. So basically, under the term ethics, we can basically group under the term ethics a large variety of areas, research fields, questions that have to be further investigated. And so through a semantic approach, we explored the etymology of the word ethics, as well as a keyword that seemed to be sort of broadly speaking recognized as a keyword used to identify virtual digital environments. So briefly speaking, we try to understand more about how do we set a new research field in which we can bring in those questions that I shared with you before. So we try to understand a bit more about what ethics really means. What do we do when we study ethics? And just to cite, just down the road here, the Cambridge Dictionary of Philosophy, ethics is commonly used interchangeably with morality, and sometimes it is used more narrowly to mean the moral principles of a particular tradition, group, or individual. So I really like to highlight here moral principles. Now, can be very subjective, right? But we know that ethics evolved quite a bit because, there has been studies on normative ethics, such as the ways of determining a moral course of action. There have been studies on applied ethics, so the obligations or permissions that a person has in a specific context. And then the meta-ethics, so the studies on theoretical meaning of moral propositions and how those values can be determined. And therefore, these basic areas of studies around ethics evolved over the time and evolved into business ethics, into the ethics of technology, bioethics, robot ethics, the ethics of nanotechnologies, and much, much more. So here, again, it's just a few names that are established in various fields. But how about the ethics of digital and virtual environments? So, well, we had a look briefly at the evolution of these. It's not a neologism. It's probably a word that has been around for a bit, but maybe the hype, or maybe the conversations, maybe a lot of factors that, as we know, influence how the society is taking shape, brought the word metaverse to the light to the spotlight. And so I'm sure you know about the sort of history of this keyword and XR, VR, and AR, so I'm not going to be spending too much time on that. But basically, as the metaverse technologies are rapidly advancing, and as well the definition is advancing and evolving over the time, it's important that everybody, from who designs the technology to who designs the tools to access that technology, to the content, to anything, basically have to understand that there are ethical domains that have to be further studied and understood in order to create policies and regulations for these technologies. So basically, to uncover these several layers of complexity around the development of those technologies, we need to study a little bit more on the behavioral, sociological, and psychological aspects that these technologies are going to bring to the life of every individual who's going to take advantage of them, who's going to use them. And therefore, being mindful of all the research questions that are still open, we tried to bring together an idea of studying the social, ethical, and integrity implications of those environments that are virtual, digital, or augmented. And therefore, this sort of keyword, the ethics of the metaverse, aka the Metavethics, came out. So you might think it's a hyped world in which, keywords like this might be going in and out. However, we think that what we are doing now and the network we're building, it's really important because we have to bridge a gap that is between the creation of these virtual and digital and augmented environments and what impacts the sociological, anthropological, and philosophical aspects of our daily life. And these, if are not understood, they will impact the safety, security, how we access these technologies, how we feel a sense of belonging of everybody who's going to be involved into that. So basically, we are at a point in history in which we don't have opportunities to get it wrong, because we had so many opportunities to learn from the past. And therefore, we are at a stage where we can really bring the value of interdisciplinary research together under an umbrella term that is going to bring the expertise of basically anybody who has a field of expertise in this world, and understand how these emerging technologies that will augment our capabilities will impact on our life. And here you see just a couple of names of the disciplines and the researchers that are involved in doing research in those disciplines that currently are working with us. Of course, this is going to expand. So this sort of sunflower, it's going to grow bigger, and more seeds are going to step in and make it bigger. And potentially, we're going to build a huge field of sunflowers. So we believe that there is the potential here to develop the necessary, it's very much needed, educational effort around the metaverse, around VR, around AR, and use Metavethics as a springboard to promote more open conversations across different communities, which is something that I believe has been lacking a bit. We have been talking more about the aspects of the technology, how it's going to bring value, how it's going to bring profit, how it's going to bring more opportunities, but not much about how do people really benefit, how do people can use it, how do people feel safe, how this is an ethical technology. And so what are we heading to? Well, it's like a call to action. As I said before, we are at a different point in history than when the internet was first conceived. We now have knowledge of DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion practices. We have a lot of skills that we can use as researchers to do more research on safety, on privacy, on accessibility, and much more. And so we don't think we have an excuse to not think and not work on that. So basically, the message that I want to leave today during this chat is that Metavethics is not just a discipline or a field or a research area that will inform the development of good, inclusive, and safe, say, digital, virtual, and immersive environments. But it's a place, it's sort of a hub that empowers people to evolve with the evolution of technologies. So we see that there will be the architects of virtual environments, the architects of augmented environments who want to be metaveticists. So people who have the knowledge of what ethical design in VR means, people who know what integrity in AR means, people who know what accessibility while they are designing extended reality experiences means. So that is, let's say, our call to action today. If you want to become a metaethicist, drop us a line. And so if you want to contribute, if you want to join, if you're interested into being part of this huge network, not to build policies and standards, but to create the evidence that will help policymakers to build policies and standards, then the right place is here. And I'm sure a lot of you are probably bringing this effort forward in many different ways. So I think we are almost at time. I promised that it would have been shorter, so we can have enough space for Q&A, and also for you to grab a coffee, grab a tea, grab some lunch or dinner, and enjoy your day. So that's it from me. Thank you for your attention.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Matteo. This is fantastic. You know, I completely agree that this effort is much needed. And I like that you are focused on the foundations on which regulations and policies can be built. And it's true that it's difficult to keep up with the pace of development of the technology, and that many governments aren't really aware of what the concerns and issues are. There are organizations such as the XRSI, the XR Safety Institute, that is working to advise some governments that have had an influence on the government of Australia, for example, on adopting some policies and regulations. Are there, let's see, okay, I see we do have some questions coming in. Genevieve is asking, how can education, researchers and educators draw on this? Because this is so important for K through 12 education.
Absolutely. And Karen, thanks for bringing up the effort of several passionate people working on this area. So to answer, well, I might not have the right answer to this question, but I think it's important to ask ourselves not just how, but when education, researchers and educators will be able to input the insights, the findings from the researcher, what we currently know, into their practices. Because sometimes there is a sort of latency in how much it's going to take, how much time it's going to take to bring in the lesson learned into, our daily activities, our daily routines. So I like the how question, and I think we should also be mindful of when. I mean, when it should be now, and or as soon as possible, let's say. And I think to be more clear with my answer is bring the how. It's about bringing them to the table and establish the work together. So I probably mentioned before that we have to design those spaces with people. So we have to co-design the research, the development, the deployment of those technologies with people. We ultimately do it for people, because we don't design for machines. We design for people. We create spaces for people. But ultimately, still, so far, all of what is designed by people. Yes, ChatGPT can build an algorithm for you, but if you don't give the right prompts, ChatGPT is not going to do anything for you. Still, behind ChatGPT, there is an algorithm that was developed by human beings. So that's why I believe that the how is with, for, and by people, and the when is, if we cannot today, can we tomorrow? Can we the day after tomorrow? It cannot be in 5 years' time. And sometimes policies take a bit to be implemented. So I hope I answered the question.
Yes, I think that was a very good answer. And of course, if you have well over 100 research questions still to be explored, and that will take time in itself, right? First of all, developing some answers to those questions so that they can be used as a foundation for regulations, and then putting the regulations into place themselves takes time. Could be 10 years, I say, and yes, I agree, it's more urgent than that, but to be realistic, it might take some time. And then of course new questions will continue to arise as we use this technology and learn its capabilities and what sorts of experiences people actually have with it, right?
Absolutely. And that's why I think it's not a one team effort here. So it's not, okay, we have 100 questions, we're working on other 20 questions, great, we have more than 100 there. Well, the question here is, how can we team up and how can we merge the effort together? Metavethics, the goal is to team up with experts, with researchers, with passionate people around the world, and to speed up the way we can answer those questions. And as we know, team effort brings us further, right? So if you want to go further, work as a team. If you want to go faster, work by yourself, but you're not going to go much further down the line, right? So that's what we're trying to do here. We're trying to partner. We're trying to find researchers that we can work with. So we're going to go further and we're going to be more impactful.
Yeah, that's great. That's wonderful. A collaborative approach is always best. Cynthia is asking about the fact that VR and AR devices are allowed to collect data from the users today. And if people don't allow it, then sometimes they can't use the device. That's a very interesting question, and it opens up a whole lot more questions, certainly for me. What do you have to say about that?
I love this question, and here it brings me back to an interesting example about one of the biggest search engines of the world, where if we want to use a service that becomes instrumental to our daily routines, unless we pay, we're going to give a lot back to the service provider. And therefore, there will be a breaking point in which we might want really to use those technologies, and it doesn't have to be a full VR experience. It might be a light AR experience. And unfortunately, even with light AR experiences, data will be collected. Therefore, it's really up to us to opt in or opt out. But as long as we keep the policies that are proper of a Web 2.0 with challenges that are different than the challenges that are into a Web 2.0 technology. And I don't want to mix up much about Web 3.0 with blockchain and NFTs and cryptos and Metaverse, because in the last 3 years, these were the 4 keywords that everybody was talking about. But honestly speaking, we cannot literally use the same policies for a technology that will be different in the future. It's like we wanna eat pizza with the sticks. I don't know how you can ideally, but I don't know how you can eat pizza with sticks. So maybe you want to eat pizza with your hands or with knife and fork, and eat a nice sushi with the sticks, right? So same for, I mean, you can eat sushi with fork and knife, of course. But let's put things into the right context. So my answer is probably we have to revise the way we allow those products and those technologies to collect data from us. And just to share with you, there is a piece of research that we published, which is about a potential approach that will be used in the future, which is called bespoke behavioral advertising, which basically says that by collecting biological and behavioral data, advertisement could be tailored in a bespoke way to the persona and the personality of each individual. Today, that is impossible. The advertising is quite generalized, and it's hard to segment exactly what kind of persona you are. But with those technologies, we know that it will be much simpler to segment customer types, not in customer types, but literally in single human beings. So a lot should evolve, I think, we think. I hope, Cinzia, I answered to your question.
Yes, thank you.
You're welcome.
Yes, and I see a lot of tension here too with the companies that are currently building these sorts of experiences. There are some very well established and very well known ones with large corporate structures that might have the opportunity to have an ethics department if they don't fire them all, as I think was it Google who just did that, yeah, for their AI ethics team. But many of the companies in the space, as I know very well, are startups and small entities that are trying to get established, maybe don't have a lot of funding to work with, and it's easy to see how questions of ethics can be left behind as they are trying to develop their products. And similarly, you do have these questions of the ability to collect data and how that affects the experience that the user will have, whether it's in terms of the gates that are put into place, in terms of having to accept multiple policies, which people may or may not read, and also the performance of an experience, of a virtual experience. And so how do we balance those things? How do we balance innovation and ethics, considering those kinds of tensions?
Well, it's a challenging question because I think it's about the interplay between both. It's really about a balance that it's like a slider, and sometimes it goes more towards the left, more towards the right, depending on the context. And I think just to give an example, well, it's true, there are lots of small startups and companies that don't have the capacity to have in-house ethics or integrity experts. And I think it's fine, because there are places and people like us who are doing this work of advocating through evidence-based research for what companies that couldn't afford could learn from. So basically, that's what I think, growing and making sure that we disseminate and democratize the research that we do, and we build a hub. I mean, we bring scientists from all over the world to be associated with a group of people that bring forward the same message, have the same passion, will really be impactful to empower even small companies, and also, of course, larger organizations to learn about what they should do and what they shouldn't do. So I encourage you, get in touch with us, follow us on LinkedIn as well, or Twitter. The more we build the community, the more we have an opportunity to, I wouldn't say influence, but to share knowledge and make sure that this knowledge is heard by small startup as well as huge organizations.
That's fantastic. Yeah, it's great to have your work as a resource for companies to use to guide them as they are building new products and new experiences. That's wonderful. Yeah.
Thank you, Karen. Thank you.
Any other?
I'm sure everybody here is it's sort of passionate and works on these topics. So on these topics. So I'm not the only one here, I'm pretty sure.
I think that is a safe assumption. Yes, yes. And so when you talk about people and organizations getting involved, what does that look like with them getting involved with your research ethics, your research efforts?
Yeah, I think, well, I think there are various opportunities, but for us, it's important that companies and business are involved as, let's say, not just spectators, but active participants, because they have to provide the technology. The technology has to be tested with real people. And we cannot do only research on, we cannot just do literature reviews, because those are important to build foundations, but then we have to test things out. And so I think the role of companies is extremely important in providing and sort of make sure that within the sphere of confidentiality, that what they want to bring to the market is fully tested, and we benchmark standards of ethics against their internal standards. Maybe, I mean, things have to be stress tested. You would never buy a car that doesn't have at least a 5 or 4.8 stars in the crash test ratings, right? Nowadays, almost every car is above 4.5 stars. 20 years ago, maybe 1 out of 100 cars was at 5 stars. So why do we buy or why do we use a technology that doesn't allow us to be ethically compliant with or regulations, or actually to make us feel safe and secure? Why we wouldn't buy a technology that has a 5 stars agreed across the world? So again, that's one thing we're working on, because we have millions of examples around ourselves, right? And why don't we do that in this field? So
yeah, that's great. That's great. And do you see different standards emerging for fields like education? Perhaps the age of the user is a factor, but are there other considerations beyond just that on the ways that the technology would be used in a field like education?
Well, absolutely, because I mean, education is at the foundations of every human being, right? So it's kind of compulsory to do that, I think, because I mean, I'm sure we could educate somebody by interacting with ChatGPT. I'm sure those experiments are already running, right? How effective, how impactful that education is going to be. So, I mean, just to give an example, a few weeks ago, ChatGPT was banned from Italy. because it didn't abide to the rules of under basically the minors. Simply, if you were 10, you could access ChatGPT, ask questions, and believe that the answers were right. But we know that some references are not very true or not very correct. Or even if you involuntarily put your name in and you are 10 years old and you share information, those information are going to be into, you know, the large LLM of ChatGPT, and therefore basically you cannot keep track of what's going on there because it's a learning algorithm. So the answer is yes. In education, especially in education, we have to focus on the ethical principles behind those emerging technologies.
Yes, yes. And, you know, education does tend to be a bit more regulated than maybe some other spaces. But are those regulations keeping up with the technology as it is evolving and maybe adopted?
Absolutely, yeah. And it's a big challenge, but we have, I mean, we have the potential today to be more effective and act faster. And again, it's not about limiting, it's about checking, deciding, and taking an action. So we are not about, I don't think it's only about setting boundaries, but it's about, okay, developing, testing, and then take an action if those tests are showing evidence that there might be something, you know, that has to be solved. Or if it's all good, no boundaries, up to when we test it again and we find that there might be a boundary that has to be put in place. So I'm more for a proactive and positive approach rather than, let's say, an approach that doesn't foster innovation because it might limit the opportunities. So as I said, you know, before, probably it's about freedom, but we're not really with limitations like one of our interviewees said, but it's freedom with a continuous iteration on what freedom means. Understanding what that means continuously. So.
Yes, I like that. I like that very much. That's a good notion. And I hope that many will join your efforts and help you to solve these thorny and constantly developing problems and to set us on the right path with the metaverse. Yeah, I did. One other thing occurred to me as you were talking. There is this sort of notion that we can, with the metaverse, create a world that is better than the one that we live in. It sort of seems that that is an opportunity available to us. However, and I think this came up in your slide, one of your slides, or in the chat. Effectively, the world as it is, the real world, comes into the metaverse. So it's perhaps not so easy to create this sort of new world that is better or is based on higher standards, because there always is this tension and interchange between the real world outside and what is being newly created.
Yeah, I think, well, I mean, it's hard to predict. I mean, it's hard to predict what's going to be in 10 years or even in 5 years, because you know, if I would have told you like a week or a year before the pandemic that we would have been stuck at home for 3 months, not everywhere in the world, but in certain countries, yeah, in other countries, not, you would have not believed it. So it's very hard to predict. I think what could I just share is that the sooner we set us up for, having the right knowledge to tackle potential challenges, the better it's going to be. So, yeah, that's the only thing I could add on top of the talk today. And thank you for all the questions, Karen. I see you might be at AWE in 2 weeks' time, so I'll see you there in Santa Clara.
Yeah.
We'll be there with Metavethics, with one of our advisors from San Francisco. So if anybody in the chat here is going to be in Santa Clara, we'll meet you in person.
That sounds great. I very much look forward to it. And thank you, everyone. And thank you, Matteo, for a really important and important talk and your very important research.
Thank you so much. Thank you, everybody. And I hope you enjoy your morning or afternoon or evening.